When aviation investigators are tasked with understanding a really catastrophic plane crash, they don't they don't rely on the fragmented memories of witnesses on the ground.
Right, because those are notoriously unreliable.
Exactly. And they don't just look at the scattered debris and try to guess what happened. They go straight for the flight data recorder.
The black box.
The black box, yeah. That little virtually indestructible orange box encased in steel. Because they retrieve it for something completely unvarnished, right? It gives them the raw, unfiltered telemetry of the machine's final moments.
It's purely objective.
Yeah, it records the altitude drops, the engine pressure anomalies, the exact millisecond the warning alarms began to blare. It's cold, and it is entirely devoid of human rationalization.
Which is exactly what you need. It provides the clinical data required to map a tragedy backward from the point of impact.
But human relationships don't come equipped with flight data recorders.
No, they certainly do not.
When a 12-year marriage crashes into the ground, investigators don't show up. All you are typically left with are two very different, incredibly messy, highly subjective sets of memories.
Right, because the people involved, they have to build their own narratives just to survive the wreckage.
Exactly. Except today. Today, we are looking at something that is as close to a marital black box as I have literally ever seen.
It really is.
And we want to bring you, the listener, right into the room with us to examine it. Because today's deep dive into our source material is fundamentally different from analyzing, say, a news article or a peer-reviewed scientific paper.
Yeah, we are dealing with a primary source in the absolute most visceral sense of the term. I mean, it is a raw document of a relationship in free fall.
Our mission today is to explore the absolute outermost boundaries of honesty in a relationship, and we're going to do that by unpacking a raw, unedited, real-life confession document written by a woman who is navigating the immediate, catastrophic fallout of her own infidelity.
It's incredibly heavy stuff.
It is. We are going to treat this source material almost like a confession-style narrative. We want to pull you directly into the mind of the author to really feel the suffocating weight of the silence in her living room.
And to experience the agonizing moment-by-moment progression of a radical disclosure.
But before we step into that living room, I think it's crucial that we establish the parameters for how we are going to handle this material.
Yes, absolutely. We need to be clear about this. The document we are analyzing today contains extremely graphic, highly sensitive, and intensely personal decisions.
Right.
It deals with extreme sexual kinks, profound betrayal, deep past trauma, and just deeply vulnerable human moments. So we are not here to cast moral judgments.
No, not at all.
We are not here to decide the rightness or wrongness of the author's sexual preferences, her infidelity, or even her husband's past. Our role and our goal for you listening is merely to observe impartially and analyze the profound, often completely paradoxical human psychology at play in this extraordinary document.
We are looking at the mechanics of the human heart when it is pushed to its absolute breaking point. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Before we can truly grasp the shocking details of the confession itself, we first have to understand the architecture of the marriage that is currently being shaken to its core.
The foundation.
Right. Imagine a couple that has been married for 12 years. And right off the bat, the author tells us that they share a very unique, highly specific bond. They both openly acknowledge that they are, in her exact words, broken people.
Broken people. Building a decade plus of marriage upon the shared identity of brokenness creates a highly unusual psychological scaffolding.
Yeah, the document doesn't shy away from the factual background either. The author has a really traumatic history. She writes about being abused, being manipulated, and having a long streak of poor decisions in her past, including engaging in sex work.
And the husband isn't a blank slate either, right?
No, not at all. He has a history of violent behavior and has actually served a significant amount of prison time. But the author writes that despite all of this, or maybe entirely because of it, they loved each other fiercely. Neither of them regretted the 12 years they've spent together. She says they felt they were, quote, kinda perfect for each other.
You know, if we look closely at that dynamic, what we are seeing is a profound level of radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance. What do you mean by that?
Well, most relationships are built on an idealized version of the other person, right? Like the honeymoon phase, where we project all our hopes onto our partner.
Right, everybody does that at the beginning.
Exactly. But this couple bypassed that completely. They built their foundation on the stark reality of their mutual scars. In psychological terms, they created a trauma-informed secure attachment.
A trauma-informed secure attachment.
Yeah, they essentially said to each other, I see the absolute worst parts of your history, the parts society deems totally unacceptable, and I choose to build a life with you anyway.
It sounds to me like their marriage was like a beautifully repaired kintsugi bowl.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You know, that Japanese art where broken pottery is mended with lacquer mixed with powdered gold?
Right, it doesn't hide the cracks.
Exactly, it highlights them. The bowl is held together specifically by the shared acceptance of its broken past. But I have to wonder, is it possible that relying on brokenness as a foundational identity makes a relationship actually more fragile when entirely new cracks appear?
That is a great question.
Like, if the glue is your past trauma, what happens when you introduce a present trauma?
And that is exactly the structural vulnerability of the kintsugi marriage. The unspoken contract in a relationship where mutual brokenness is the glue is often something along the lines of, well, we accept the trauma we brought into this house, but we absolutely do not inflict new trauma upon each other.
How is it?
The safety of the relationship relies entirely on the threat remaining strictly in the past tense.
And that unspoken contract brings us to the inciting incident, the betrayal.
Right.
The author narrates that she cheated on her husband with a man she met at a bar. It was a one-night stand, and she almost immediately confessed to her husband.
Okay.
But the details she provides about the mechanics of the cheating are just striking in their intentionality. She admits to consciously taking off her wedding ring when she first met this affair partner.
Wow.
Yeah, she made a deliberate physical choice to remove the symbol of her marriage before the affair even escalated.
You know, the physical act of removing a wedding ring is a fascinating psychological trigger.
Is it?
Mm.
Because to a layperson, taking off the ring just looks like standard deception. Like it's just hiding the evidence.
I mean, it is deception, absolutely. But
Yeah.
the primary person being deceived in that specific moment is often the wearer themselves.
Really? How so?
Well, the human brain struggles violently with cognitive dissonance. That's when you hold two conflicting beliefs or values at the exact same time.
Right.
So this woman values her radical acceptance marriage, but she's about to engage in an act that will destroy it. To survive the psychological friction of that moment, the brain requires a physical mechanism to separate her wife identity from her affair identity.
Oh, wow. So sliding the ring off does that.
Exactly. By sliding that metal band off her finger, she is creating a physical boundary. She is attempting to leave the wife and all the moral obligations of the wife in her purse or her pocket, allowing a completely detached version of herself to walk to the bar.
That makes a lot of sense. And when she tries to explain the why behind this, like why she would risk this radical acceptance they had built, why she would create that detached version of herself, she lists a few things.
What does she list?
She cites a midlife crisis. She says she lacked integrity and fell for, quote, cheap validation.
Okay.
But she also mentions that she was going through a porn and sex addiction. Now, this is a crucial distinction she makes in the doc. She insists that the incredibly kinky, uninhibited sex she had with the affair partner was simply a side effect of that addiction.
A side effect.
Yeah, she says it was not the primary goal of the cheating.
What's fascinating here is how the author is actively structuring her own accountability to make sense of her betrayal. Look at how she categorizes the event. She rigidly separates the act of infidelity from the kinks involved in the infidelity.
I noticed that too. She seems to be saying, like, the cheating was me making a bad choice, but the extreme kinks were the addiction taking the wheel.
Exactly. She is trying to manage an overwhelming amount of guilt. She views the infidelity itself as a moral failure, a lack of integrity, as she puts it, a weak moment of seeking cheap validation from a stranger.
Right.
But the extreme sexual acts, by categorizing those as a mere symptom of a broader psychological addiction, she distances her core ego from them. It is a survival mechanism.
Because the guilt would be too much otherwise.
Yes. If every single extreme thing she did in that hotel room was a fully conscious, sober choice reflecting her true desires, the guilt would result in total ego collapse. She has to believe the addiction was a secondary force operating her body during the extreme elements.
I understand the survival mechanism, I do, but I'm not fully convinced it isn't also a convenient narrative device, you know?
Fair point.
By blaming the extreme details on a side effect of addiction, she sort of softens the blow to her own self-image.
She definitely does.
But regardless of how she categorizes it internally, this strict rationalization perfectly sets the stage for how she approached what had to be the most difficult day of her entire marriage. The morning of planned full disclosure.
The transition from the internal rationalization to the external reality, this is where it gets incredibly intense.
So let's step back into the narrative. If you are listening, put yourself into this living room. It's morning. The husband stayed over the previous night, so there's already this heavy, lingering physical intimacy in the air.
Yeah.
The coffee's probably made. The morning light is coming through the windows. They had previously agreed to do a formal affair disclosure. And she doesn't just sit him down and talk to him.
No.
No. She physically hands him a detailed affair disclosure letter. She prepared a written, physical document exactly as he had requested.
You know, the materiality of a letter fundamentally changes the nature of the disclosure.
How so?
It takes the betrayal out of the realm of fleeting spoken words. Like, spoken words can be misremembered, right? They can be walked back or softened by tone of voice.
That's true.
But a letter turns it into a permanent physical artifact. He has to actually hold the evidence of his own devastation right there in his hands.
And the data dump in this letter is just staggering. She details exactly what this document contained. She didn't spare him a single metric.
Wow.
It included how things progressed with the affair partner, who initiated what, the exact sex positions used, the specific extreme kinks they engaged in, the duration of each act, the exact dirty talk that occurred, and even what they talked about afterward when they were just lying there.
My God. It reads like a clinical autopsy of a murder, but the victim is their marriage.
Exactly. And as he reads this, she describes his reaction, and it is the kind of description that makes the hair on your arms stand up.
What did he do?
Absolute silence.
Just silence.
He maintained a totally blank expression on his face. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the paper across the room. He didn't cry.
That is deeply unnerving.
Right. She eventually couldn't take the quiet anymore and asked him what he was thinking. He just looked up from the paper, looked at her, and said very calmly that he was just trying to not lose his composure.
A completely flat affect in the face of psychological trauma.
Reading into her internal monologue here is just heartbreaking, regardless of what she did. She writes that she really wanted to tell him that he was allowed to be mad.
She was bracing for the explosion.
She was. She expected him to be disgusted and deeply disappointed. But when the explosion didn't come, she chose to offer him silence, if that was how he needed to process it. She just sat there in the quiet with him while he stared at this dossier of her infidelity.
Wow.
But I have to push back on the fundamental premise of this entire exercise.
Okay, what do you mean?
Is handing over a detailed time-stamped dossier of your infidelity actually helpful for the betrayed partner? Or is this just the cheater's way of purging their own immense guilt, effectively forcing the other person to carry the heavy, excruciating weight of those details?
That is a phenomenal question. You are touching on one of the most fiercely debated topics in clinical infidelity recovery.
The whole honesty thing.
Yes, the philosophy of radical honesty versus the philosophy of protective omission. But before we judge the ethics of the letter, we really need to unpack the husband's blank face, because his physiological reaction gives us the answer to how his brain is handling that dossier.
Okay, break it down for me.
What she's describing in that living room is a classic textbook neurobiological trauma response. We call it emotional flooding.
Flooding. I've heard the term, usually in the context of anxiety, right? Like a circuit breaker, tripping when too many appliances are plugged in.
That is a highly accurate analogy. Let's look at the actual mechanism happening inside his skull while he reads about the duration of the acts and the dirty talk.
Okay.
The human brain is an incredibly sophisticated threat detection machine, but to the primitive parts of our brain, specifically, the amygdala social and emotional betrayal registers on the exact same neural pathways as a literal physical threat to our survival.
Wait, really? Like being chased by a bear?
Exactly like that. When he reads that letter, his amygdala sounds an absolute klaxon alarm. His autonomic nervous system begins to surge with adrenaline and cortisol.
But if he's surging with adrenaline, shouldn't he be yelling? Shouldn't he be in fight mode? Why the blank face?
Because the threat is so overwhelming, so pervasive, that the standard fight or flight response is deemed completely insufficient by the nervous system.
It's worse than fight or flight.
Yes. When the brain calculates that fighting is impossible and fleeing won't stop the pain, it activates the deepest, most primitive defense mechanism we have, which is governed by the dorsal vagal complex.
The dorsal vagal complex.
Right, it's the freeze response. The parasympathetic nervous system engages to an extreme, almost pathological degree to prevent total psychological annihilation.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for logical thought and emotional regulation, is essentially taken offline. The brain literally shuts down the emotional processing centers just to maintain basic physiological functioning, like breathing and keeping the heart beating.
So when he says he is trying not to lose his composure, he isn't being stoic at all. He's functionally paralyzed.
He is absolutely paralyzed. He isn't feeling nothing. He is feeling everything all at once to a degree that his conscious mind simply cannot parse.
Wow.
He is trapped inside his own mind, desperately trying to construct a new reality where this document exists because the reality he woke up in an hour ago has been retroactively destroyed.
That reframes the entire scene for me. The silence isn't calm, it's the silence of a system failure.
Exactly.
But that silence was only a temporary dam, because once that initial neurobiological shock wore off, once the flooding receded just enough for his prefrontal cortex to boot back up and allow him to speak, his need for information took a highly specific, deeply visceral turn.
Here we go.
Yeah, we're moving away from the silence and into the interrogation.
The search for the bottom of the wound begins. Once the brain realizes it has been attacked, it immediately wants to map the exact dimensions of the threat.
And he didn't start by sharing his feelings. He didn't talk about his heartbreak or how much he loved her. He wanted exact physical and emotional details.
Right.
The narrative zeroes in on a specific moment during the initial reading of the letter. She notes that while he was reading, he raised his eyebrows and sighed. Just a sigh.
A sigh can mean a lot.
It did. And she realized it happened right when he read the part where she confessed to giving the affair partner unprotected oral sex.
The removal of the barrier. In the context of infidelity, unprotected acts signify the ultimate physical risk, but also the ultimate breakdown of the boundary that protects the marital unit.
Later, completely out of the blue, he breaks the silence to ask a blunt, terrifying question.
What does he ask?
He says, "Did you swallow?" Yeah. She writes that it took her a full second to even comprehend what he was asking because it was so sudden and so sharp. She had to gather her courage, regain her composure, and admit the truth. Yes, she did. As unfortunate as that was for her to admit.
That specific admission is a devastating blow. It takes the betrayal from a physical act of friction and turns it into an act of intimate consumption.
But the psychology of what he asks next is what really struck me, and I want your take on it.
Okay.
He followed up by asking, "Did you like it?" Now, she answers honestly. She says she usually doesn't like doing that, but she did it in the heat of the moment out of a need to impress the affair partner.
A need to impress a stranger. Consider how that lands on a man who has spent 12 years accepting her deepest flaws.
Oh, man.
Yeah, she didn't feel the need to impress him, the man who accepted her trauma, but she degraded herself to impress a guy she met at a bar.
And the interrogation relentlessly moves forward, getting more specific. He brings up a rim job she performed on the affair partner. And the husband's question is forensic. He asks if she stuck her tongue in like she did for him the previous night.
He is drawing a direct, agonizing line between the affair and their current marital bed.
Right.
He is trying to figure out if his own intimate experiences have been contaminated or replicated.
She tells him no, she didn't do it the same way. But then he asks a hypothetical question that seems designed only to cause pain. He asks, would you have done it for him if he asked?
Oh, that is rough.
And she answers with brutal, radical honesty. She says, probably yes.
You know, that hypothetical yes might actually inflict more psychological damage than anything that actually occurred.
Why do you say that?
Because a hypothetical yes means the affair partner had unlimited access to her boundaries. There was no line she wouldn't cross for him.
He then moves away from the logistics and targets her physical pleasure. He asks if the degradation of the encounter felt better than normal sex. Did it make her orgasm harder?
More comparison.
Exactly. She admits it was pleasurable, yes, but she qualifies it. She tells him it didn't match the intensity of some of the orgasms she's had with him over their 12 years together. He then asks if she ever thought about the affair partner during sex with him. She says, honestly, no.
He is testing every single boundary of her physical and emotional experience, trying to find a metric where he still wins.
And then comes the aftermath of the affair. He asks if she masturbated to the memories of the hotel room.
Okay.
And she writes that, putting aside all of her immense shame, she had to look him in the eye and tell him yes. She masturbated to those memories multiple times in the days following the affair, though she is careful to note she hasn't done so since her confession.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If you look at the structure of these questions, The husband isn't asking about the logistics of the betrayal anymore.
No, he's not.
He doesn't care about the layout of the hotel room or what time she got to the bar. Every single question, the swallowing, the orgasm intensity, the masturbation, is entirely focused on comparing his own sexual worth, his own intimacy, to the affair partner's.
What you're observing is a textbook, deeply tragic example of a phenomenon known in infidelity counseling as pain shopping.
Pain shopping.
Yeah.
Actively seeking out the things that are going to hurt you the most. I've always struggled to understand the logic behind that. Why walk into the fire?
Because from an evolutionary and psychological standpoint, the brain cannot tolerate ambiguity when a primary threat is present.
He needs to know exactly what the threat is.
Exactly. The betrayed partner begins to ask questions that they know on some rational level will inevitably devastate them. Why do they do it? Because their world has suddenly become utterly unpredictable. The person they trusted most is suddenly a source of danger. So they are desperately trying to map the exact agonizing dimensions of the threat. The logic is, well, if I can find the absolute worst detail, if I can touch the very bottom of the deepest, darkest part of the betrayal, then maybe, just maybe, nothing else can ever surprise me again.
Wow.
They were looking for control in a situation where they have been violently stripped of all agency.
So by asking, "Did you swallow?" he's not actually curious about the bodily fluid at all. He's trying to find the outer perimeter of the nightmare. He's trying to build a fence around the trauma so he knows where the monsters are.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. He is building a fence. But there is a secondary, deeply paradoxical layer to pain shopping.
What is that?
While he is demanding specific details that prove how much of herself she gave to the other man, he is simultaneously desperately seeking reassurance that he is still better or more loved.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. When he asks, "Did it make you orgasm harder?" he is terrified she will say yes, but he is praying she will say no. He is throwing himself against the wall of her honesty, hoping to find a brick that proves the intimacy they share in their marriage is still supreme.
It is a torturous cognitive loop.
It really is. He seeks validation through the exact lens of his own utter devastation.
If you're listening to this and wondering why anyone would subject themselves to that loop, you really have to understand the power of cortisol. His brain is frantically trying to solve a puzzle that literally has no solution.
Yeah.
And this relentless search for the absolute bottom of the truth, this pain shopping, led to the revelation of an act so extreme that it finally broke the husband's stoic, blank-faced demeanor. We reach a point in the document that I can only describe as the pinnacle of degradation.
This is the moment where the parameters of their known marital reality completely fracture.
Leaning back into the confession narrative,
Yeah.
the author describes what has to be the most vulnerable, the most humiliating admission in the entire document. The husband looks at her, having exhausted the questions about orgasms and hypothetical rim jobs, and asks a summarizing question. He asks which act made her feel the most degraded, and which one does she think about the most.
He is asking for the apex of her shame. He wants the crown jewel of the betrayal.
And she gives it to him. She doesn't hold back at all. She tells him about a piss fetish act.
Yeah.
The details are incredibly stark. She relays that after the act, she was asked to get down on all fours and lick semen and urine that had dripped onto the floor.
Oh, wow.
She admits to her husband that this, out of everything that happened that night, was the act she found the most profoundly degrading.
It is an act of profound, almost theatrical submission to a complete stranger.
But the reaction, the husband's reaction to this specific revelation, is what makes this moment stop you dead in your tracks.
What did he do?
Unlike the quiet nodding, the blank face, the stoic silence he maintained through all the other grueling details of the dossier and the interrogation, when she told him this specific detail, he straight up laughed at her.
He laughed, not a yell of anger, not a cry of despair. Laughter.
She writes how profoundly embarrassing, how deeply hollowing it was to admit this incredibly shameful act to the man she loves, only to have him laugh right in her face.
Yeah.
How do we interpret that laugh? It feels so jarring, so completely dissonant compared to his earlier silence.
It does.
My initial reaction is that it's cruelty. Was it a deliberate attempt to mock her vulnerability and punish her? Or was it shock?
You know, I look at it slightly differently. While it feels cruel to her in the moment, if we connect this to the broader neurological picture of how the human mind handles extreme psychological stress, that laugh makes total horrifying sense.
Really?
Yeah, it is highly likely that it wasn't malicious humor at all, it wasn't a calculated punishment. That laugh was a pressure release valve.
But consider this. Isn't calling it a pressure release valve just giving him a convenient psychological excuse for cruelty? Like, how can we differentiate between a trauma-induced short circuit and a genuine bitter desire to mock the woman who just destroyed his life?
It's a vital question, and we differentiate it by looking at the cognitive load he is carrying in that exact second.
Okay, lay out for me.
Think about the intense mental gymnastics he has been performing all morning. He has been actively trying to mentally simulate her infidelity. He can imagine a kiss. He can imagine the mechanics of intercourse. He can even, with great emotional agony, imagine the oral sex.
Right, he has a baseline for those things.
Exactly. His brain has reference points for those acts. But when the narrative enters the realm of licking bodily fluids off a hotel floor, when the reality of the betrayal breaches the absolute limits of what a person can mentally simulate or anticipate, the brain literally runs out of coping algorithms.
That's like a computer encountering a line of code. It has absolutely no software to read. It just crashes.
Yes, exactly. It is cognitive overload. There is a psychological concept called the incongruity theory of humor.
Incongruity theory.
Right. We laugh when the brain expects one outcome, but is presented with something so wildly disconnected from that expectation that it cannot reconcile the two. His brain is trying to process this data as a realistic threat to his marriage, but the data is so far outside the bounds of his known reality that it fails.
It just can't process it.
Right. The brain defaults to absurdity. Laughter, in this specific context, is often the central nervous system's final, desperate defense mechanism against a total psychological collapse. It's the mind involuntarily saying, well, this cannot possibly be real, therefore it must be absurd.
That is incredibly dark, but the neuroscience of it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's not the laugh of a man enjoying a joke, it's the laugh of a man whose reality is completely short-circuited.
Precisely.
But the tragedy here is that the interrogation didn't stop at the affair.
It rarely does.
The broken seal of radical honesty meant that the parameters of their entire shared history were suddenly unstable. The husband suddenly realized that if she could do this, and if she could hide this, then the foundational myths of their relationship were suspect.
Right.
He didn't actually know his wife's entire history either. The current betrayal inherently demanded a relitigation of the past.
The timeline of the interrogation begins to move backward. When trust is eradicated in the present, the past is instantly put on trial.
Right. She describes how the conversation slowly, inevitably progressed backward in time, moving away from the hotel room and into her life before they even met 12 years ago.
Okay.
Now remember the foundation we discussed at the beginning. They built their marriage on being broken people. So he knew things. The document recounts that he knew she had an extensive, colorful past. He knew she had done sex work. He knew she'd been in orgies and partner-sharing arrangements.
So he knew the genre of her past, so to speak? He had read the summary on the back of the book?
Exactly. He had the summary. But because the seal of absolute, terrifying truth had been broken by the affair dossier, he started asking for the full transcript.
Oh, boy.
And there were things she had omitted over the last 12 years. He didn't know her actual specific body count number. He only had a ballpark figure.
He didn't know that she had willfully participated in massive gangbangs that were specifically centered around her. He didn't know that some of these extreme sexual encounters from her past were consensually recorded on camera.
The difference between knowing a summary and reading the granular transcript is the difference between knowing a storm hit a town and walking through the rubble of the destroyed houses.
That is a great way to put it. And the author's internal conflict regarding these past omissions is just fascinating to read. She actively defends herself in the document.
How does she defend it?
She insists she never lied to him because she claims she is, in her words, incapable of lying with a straight face. She justifies the omissions by saying she thought she had left that entire life behind. She truly believed those details didn't matter anymore.
Well, people change over a decade.
Right, and she specifically notes a technicality, which is that he had never explicitly asked for these specific details.
Ah, the technicality defense.
Yes. Yet despite all these logical rationalizations, she writes about feeling this intense, crushing guilt for unwittingly hiding the true depth of her promiscuity from a man who already knew she was a sex worker.
She feels that crushing guilt because, in the wake of the affair, the entire context of those omissions has been radically altered.
So what does this all mean for the concept of truth? We are looking at the semantic gap between not mentioning something and actively lying. I keep thinking of an analogy.
Let's hear it.
It's like Assuming you know everything about a house because you bought it, knowing it was a fixer-upper. You know the roof leaks, you know the plumbing is bad.
Right.
But then 12 years later, you accidentally discover a massive, sprawling, hidden basement you never explicitly asked about, and the seller never thought to mention because the door was locked. Is the seller a liar?
I love that analogy. It beautifully captures the philosophical dilemma here. This raises an incredibly important question about the fundamental difference between privacy and secrecy in long-term relationships.
Okay, unpack that difference for us.
Before the affair, her hidden basement was just privacy. And privacy is deeply healthy, right? It's the psychological boundary that protects our individual identity within a partnership. You do not need to know every single granular, agonizing detail of your partner's life before you met them in order to love them fully.
Yeah, that makes sense.
He knew the broad strokes, he accepted her trauma, and they were happy.
I agree, privacy is healthy. So what changed in that living room? Why did the hidden basement suddenly become a symbol of secrecy and betrayal?
Because the affair acted as a chemical catalyst. It retroactively altered the nature of the information. Once trust is fundamentally broken in the present tense, the betrayed brain is forced to look at the entire past through a lens of profound suspicion.
Everything is suspect now.
Everything. What was once seen as a harmless, unspoken history is instantly converted into active, malicious deceit in the husband's eyes. His brain is running a terrifying logic program, which is, well, if she could hide this extreme affair from me yesterday, what else has she been hiding for 12 years? The unasked questions suddenly feel like calculated lies of omission. She isn't guilty of lying per se, but she is guilty of failing to realize that her present actions would permanently revoke her right to past privacy.
Revoke her right to past privacy. That is a heavy, almost suffocating sentence.
It is.
But it is exactly what happened. And this collision, the present trauma of the affair smashing into these sudden, jarring revelations about the depth of her past, culminated in a demand from the husband that is universally agonizing.
It's a final stage.
Yes, the interrogation reaches its final, most exhausting stage. The collision of past and present forced them into the impossibility of comparison.
The human mind's desperate attempt to quantify qualitative pain.
The document details how he began demanding direct physical comparisons between himself, the affair partner, and the men from her unearthed hidden basement.
Yeah.
He asked the impossible questions.
Oh, no.
The questions that have destroyed thousands of relationships. Who was better at what? Who was the hottest? Who had the biggest penis?
These are questions that mathematically have no safe answer. They are a trap designed by a brain drowning in cortisol.
She expresses a deep, visceral hatred for comparing partners in the letter. She states she has never weighed past lovers on a scale, but she feels entirely obligated to answer because she caused the pain.
Right, she feels she owes him.
And what breaks my heart here is that she tried to answer with total honesty and nuance. She tries to treat him like a rational adult.
That's a mistake in this state.
It is. She explains to him, for example, that just because a guy from her past had a bigger penis, it absolutely does not mean she enjoyed sex with him more. She is trying to offer emotional context to physical facts.
But I'm sure you can see the flaw in her approach here. She is trying to use advanced logic in a space that is completely devoid of it.
Yes, she's trying to speak French to a man who only understands mathematics right now. It takes a massive toll. She recognizes that her actions, her betrayal, created these terrifying doubts in his mind, making it her responsibility to help him navigate the wreckage.
She wants to fix it.
She is willing to answer every question, but ultimately, the sheer volume of overwhelming, radical details leads to severe emotional exhaustion for the husband. He isn't built to hold this much data.
Nobody is.
After all of the questions, the comparisons, the hidden basement, he stated he just needed to go out and be alone for a bit. He had hit his absolute biological and emotional limit.
And that is the tragic irony of her attempt at radical honesty and nuance. In a state of profound insecurity and trauma, the betrayed brain simply cannot process nuance. It only processes threats.
Wow.
When she says, yes, his penis was bigger, but I didn't enjoy it more because I love you, his brain does not hear the second half of that sentence. The nuance is literally burned away by the cortisol flooding his system.
So what does he hear?
His brain only records the data point. He was bigger. Threat confirmed. Her willingness to answer these impossible questions is a desperate, loving attempt to atone, right? To show she has absolutely nothing left to hide. But by providing these comparative metrics, by giving him the exact measurements of the men from her past and present, she might ultimately be inflicting more enduring trauma on both of them. She is giving his deepest insecurities exact defined shapes to haunt him with forever.
She gave the monsters a face.
Yes.
And that brings us to the agonizing cliffhanger of the document.
Hmm.
The author notes that he went out, but he is coming over again tonight. She writes that she wants to check up on his emotional state.
The anticipation must be awful.
She knows there are pending, incredibly heavy topics hovering over them. They have to discuss their previously discussed idea of opening their marriage, which, takes on a terrifying new context now.
Absolutely.
They have to decide what they're going to do about the ultimate future of their relationship, but the document just ends there. The confession stops.
It leaves them perfectly suspended in the immediate, suffocating aftermath of total devastation. The dust hasn't even begun to settle.
Bringing us back out of this intense living room narrative, the sheer weight of this radical disclosure document is staggering. If you step back and look at the whole picture, we are looking at how a single night of seeking cheap validation at a bar completely dismantled the protective, mutually accepted reality of a 12-year marriage between two self-described broken people.
The kintsugi bowl didn't just crack, it shattered into dust.
It did.
It is a stark, unforgiving reminder that human relationships are profoundly, infinitely messy. They defy simple categorization. Our goal today was not to cast stones at this woman for her profound failures, nor was it to judge her husband for his reactions or his own dark history.
Right.
Our goal was to look closely under the hood, to read the flight data recorder, to understand the actual neurological and psychological mechanics of honesty, to examine the anatomy of betrayal, and to witness the severe, sometimes unmanageable consequences of leaving absolutely no stone unturned in the pursuit of truth.
We are taught from childhood, through fairy tales and moral lessons, that honesty is the ultimate unassailable virtue in love. We are told that the truth will set you free.
We hear it all the time.
But looking at the wreckage of this specific marriage, reading the pain radiating off the pages of this confession, it leaves you with a lingering, almost frightening question. A question that challenges everything we think we know about intimacy.
What is that?
If radical, 100% unfiltered transparency permanently destroys the foundational myths we build to feel safe with our partners, is there such a thing as too much truth? At a certain point, does total forensic honesty stop being a virtue and start becoming a weapon we unwittingly use to destroy the people we love the most?
That is a very heavy thought to leave on.
The black box is open, the data has been downloaded, but maybe, just maybe, we simply weren't meant to hear every single agonizing sound on the tape. Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the human condition.